is March 19th, and I'm just going to talk to you today about Act 1, Scene 1 of The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. There were quite a few people who had, in their summaries, perfectly explained why Act 1, Scene 1 sets up the initial conflict. There were others that were a little off but had the right understanding. And I saw one or two comments about how it was difficult to understand what it was that you were reading. So I am showing you this website, myshakespeare.com, with Romeo and Juliet. What I really like about this website itself is it does numerous things. The first of which is that it defines the words that you may not know as they are reading their words. Another thing is they have a nice audio here. So if I push play, you'll get an idea of where it's at.
Gregory, on my word, will not carry culls.
No, for then we should be colliers.
I mean, and we be in collar, will draw.
Aye, while you live, draw your neck out of the collar.
I strike quickly, being moved.
But thou art not quickly moved to strike.
So, in other words, when Act 1, Scene 1 begins, you have two servants of the Capulets in town, basically not currently working at their job, protecting the Capulets, but still kind of making fun of one another about their jobs. And one of the nice things about this, besides the audio, is that if you click the speech bubble, it'll actually translate what you're reading into standard written English if you're having a hard time understanding. So this is a really good website to use, and there's also No Fear Shakespeare that does the same thing as well. So in Act 1, Scene 1, you have Samson and Gregory, House of Capulets, servants who basically are making fun of the whole situation and saying that they will, be violent no matter who it is, if it is to kind of, get back at the Montagues. What it does is it showcases that the quarrel, which it says right here, is between our masters and us, their men. In other words, the quarrel is between the Montagues and the Capulets. However, at this point, the servants just follow through with the feud, so they're going to fight for the Capulets no matter what. They're joking around, rather perverse conversation, and then all of a sudden Gregory and Samson are speaking, and Abraham and Balthazar enter. Now, Abraham and Balthazar are from the house of Montague. And so they start off with the whole bite your thumb at us, sir. And it's basically an insult of Shakespearean time. So biting your thumb could be the equivalent of flipping someone off. So if you see what he's saying here, well, are you doing that? You see the first Samson saying an aside to Gregory. So an aside, again, is one of the terms that you defined on the Shakespeare terminology. An aside is when a character talks to another character, the audience is supposed to see it, but the other characters act as if they haven't. This is kind of like a Zach Morris moment from Saved by the Bell or The Office when, the characters break their dimension and talk to the audience. They don't want to actually get into a fight in this situation. They're more like teasing one another back and forth to see who's going to start a fight. Eventually, you get Tybalt who enters the scene. Now, Tybalt is a Capulet noble, and Benvolio enters the scene, and Benvolio is a Montague noble. Now, what we'll know now is that Tybalt is Juliet's cousin, as well as Benvolio being Romeo's cousin. So they kind of match each other perfectly like that. When they start fighting and Benvolio enters the scene, Benvolio doesn't want anything to do with the fighting, and he says, "Part, fools, put up your swords, you know not what you do." In other words, you should not be fighting. You should understand that this is not the right time or the right place. Tybalt comes apart this and says, "What art thou drawing among these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, look upon thy death." Look at what he says the first time he talks to Benvolio. He says, "Turn around and look upon thy death." Instantly letting you know that Tybalt is hot-headed, ready to fight. He's not just ready to fight Benvolio, he's ready to kill him. And Benvolio says, "I do but keep the peace. Put up thy sword, or manage to part these men with me." In other words, put up your sword, but don't do it to fight. Maintain the peace. Tybalt's response, "What talk and drawn a peace? I hate the words, I hate hell, all Montagues and thee. Have at thee, coward." Eventually they just start fighting. And the citizens enter the fight, and it just seems to be a very loud, momentous argument where the Capulets come in. Now here's where you see Lord and Lady Capulet, and Lord Capulet says, "What noise is this? Give me my long sword, ho." And he means that immediately. And Lady Capulet comes back to him and says, a crutch, what call you for a sword?" Pointing out that his days of fighting are long over unless he's using his sword for a crutch to help him walk. He says, "My sword, I say, all Montague has come and flourishes his blade in spite of me." And then all of a sudden you get Lady Montague and Lord enter the scene as well. And Montague says, "Thou villain Capulet, hold me not, let me go." And Lady Capulet says, "Thou shalt not stir a foot to seek a foe." So it almost seems as if in this case, the women, the wives of Lord Montague and Lord Capulet, are a little more reasonable here. And here's where the prince enters. Now, Princess Scalia is basically your mayor, your president, your police officer, all built into one. So anything he says will have to be followed. And let's listen to what he says here.
Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel, will they not hear? What ho! You men, you beasts, that quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains issuing from your veins, on pain of torture, from those bloody hands throw your mistempered weapons to the ground, and hear the sentence of your moved prince. 3 civil brawls bred of an airy word, by thee, old Capulet, and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens, cast by their grave beseeming ornaments, to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace, to part your cankered hate. If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. For this time all the rest depart away. You, Capulet, shall go along with me, and Montague, come you this afternoon, to know our further pleasure in this case. To old Freetown, our common judgment place. Once more, on pain of death, all men depart.
So when the prince enters the scene, you can see just by his tone that he is not happy with what he sees. Rebellious subjects, enemies of the peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel. Well, then I hear what, oh, you men, you beasts, that quench the fire of your pernicious rage, with purple fountains issuing from your veins. On pain of torture, from those bloody hands throw your mistempered weapons to the ground, and hear the sentence of your moved prince. In other words, all this fighting, all this anger and the loudness that he sees, he says, "This is it." And he says, "On pain of torture, you have to throw your weapons to the ground and listen to me now." And now he tells us, 3 civil brawls bred of an airy word by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens cast by the grave beseeming ornaments. In other words, they have disturbed the peace 3 times with civil brawls, and a normal quiet town has been disturbed by their fighting. And also the people who are fighting, it says, to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace to part your cankered height. In other words, this just shouldn't be happening here. People who shouldn't be fighting are fighting. And here is his actual decree. A very important line here. "If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace." Think about what he's saying here. He's basically saying that if you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. In other words, you get in a fight in town again, you will die. This is important. This could foreshadow something later on. "For this time, while the rest depart away, you, Capulet, shall go along with me, and old Montague come you this afternoon, to know our further pleasure in this case. To old Freetown, our common judgment place. Once more, on pain of death, all men depart." In other words, basically, everyone has to stop fighting. He'll talk to each person separately at different points during the day, and he reminds them once more on pain of death, don't forget, if you fight again, you will die. And that is how the prince's monologue starts us off. And it's so important because it shows us that the Montagues and Capulets don't just have a little feud, that it is big enough and significant enough that they've fought within the streets 3 times, and that the end result has not been good any of those times. When the scene ends, or that part ends, and the prince leaves, we are only left with Lord Montague, Lady Montague, and Benvolio. And all of a sudden, they ask a little bit about who set this ancient quarrel new abroad. "Speak, nephew, were you by where it began?" And he'll tell them what's happening. He's honest. He says, "Here were the servants of your adversary, and yours close fighting ere I did approach. I drew to part them. In the instant came the fiery Tybalt with his sword prepared, which he breathed defiance to my ears. He swung about his head and cut the wind, who, nothing hurt withal, hissed him in scorn while we were interchanging thrust and blows. Came more and more and fought on part, till the prince came who parted either part." In other words, he tells him exactly what happens. He said that Fire Tybalt came in, he wanted to fight, and that Benvolio tried to stop him, but it didn't work. Then all of a sudden the conversation changes, and Lady Montague says, "Well, where is Romeo? We haven't seen him, but we're glad he wasn't involved in here." And then Benvolio paints the picture of what's been happening with Romeo. And he says that he couldn't sleep at night and he was wandering around. And he says, "So early waking did I see your son. Toward him I made, but he was ware of me, and stole into the covert of the woods. I measuring his affections by my own, which then most sought where most might not be found. Being one too many by my weary self, pursued my humor, not pursuing his, and gladly shunned who gladly fled from me." Again, if you're having trouble, you hit the little conversation button, and it'll kind of tell you. It kind of paraphrases it into modern day English. And it says, "I figured his mood was the same as mine. He wanted to be totally alone. After all, I felt just being with myself was one too much company. So I followed my inclination, which was not to follow him." And then we get the background from Lord Montague and says that, he's been seen in the early morning with tears augmenting the fresh morning dew. In other words, he's been seen crying in the morning. And then it says, "As soon as the old cheering sun should in the furthest east begin to draw the shady curtains from Aurora's bed, away from light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself and shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out." So again, he shows what happens. Once it gets to be daylight, he goes into his room and he makes an artificial night. He ends this with a rather important statement. "Black and portentous must this humor prove, unless good counsel may the cause remove." He knows, as a father figure, that seeing his son acting in this manner is not safe for his son, and he knows that unless they get to the bottom of it, something deadly might happen. And when Benvolio asks his uncle, "Do you know what happened?" he says, "I don't know it, and I can't learn of it." Um, and he says that they still haven't been able to talk to him. He says, "Could we but learn from whence the sorrow grows, we would willingly give cure as to know." And Benvolio says, "You know what? See where he comes, so please you step aside. I'll know his grievance or be much denied." And so he says he'll look for it, he'll consider it. As Lord and Lady Montague end, you get the ending of the scene with Benvolio and Romeo, and you can see that Romeo is very upset. He's waiting on about the day being so young. "I me sad hours seem long. Was that my father that went hence so fast?" And Benvolio says, "Well, what sadness lengthens Romeo's hours?" He replies with not having that which has making them short. He says, "In love, out of love, out of her favor where I'm in love." So now we know right now the main reason that he's upset is that the person that he's in love with, the girl, he's out of her favor. And here you get Benvolio, "Last, that love so gentle in his proof should be so tyrannous and rough in proof." And here is where we're going to see a little bit of the term oxymoron. Now, you're going to be looking at this today and seeing what you can understand about the use of oxymorons in the scene. So I'm going to leave you with the last couple sections of Act 1, Scene 1 to go over again. But as you can see, the whole scene is here, and you will get all the information about it, as well as there being scene summaries here. So this is a really good website to look at. Make sure every day you are looking at your video, you are looking at your priority list. Just looking at the assignments and when they're due on the classroom is not enough. As you know, the videos are posted. We'll go over everything that we're looking at, but also the priority sheet today will tell you exactly what you have to do, as well as the homework assignments and classwork assignments and when they're due. Remember, most of the assignments are due by 5 p.m. All right. At this point, I'd say to continue on, I'm going to post a video today for you to look at the first 10 minutes of the scene, and you can now see a visual interpretation of what we've just read. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email me, and I'll do my best to respond as quickly as I can. Have a good day.